concludes all operations of the emergency alert system. All stations may now resume regular programming.
For expanding its sphere of influence on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
All right, let's talk about COP27 and their insane agenda, which consists of manipulating people into believing they are saving the world by accepting economic subjugation. However, we have to start with a few setup stories just to get an idea of how deep this all goes and how many people are moving us towards this total control future. So, Jeff Bezos says he will give away a majority of his $124 billion fortune within his lifetime to climate change charities. Or, it could just mean that he's going to invest the money in his organizations that will allow him to not pay taxes. Yeah, that sounds probably about right. From there, the United Kingdom claims that everyone just has to pay a little bit more. Yes, they say it's the only way to save the world, obviously. It's all an economic scam, liquidating the wealth of the people and funneling it back to the top. Now, I saw a clip of Stanley Johnson, Boris Johnson's father, which we have talked about before because he openly talks about his desire for depopulation.
Add as a corollary to that, you have to get population under control as well, because if you look at it in sheer economic terms, how can you sustain increases in per capita income at a time when you have rising population without rising economic growth? Whereas if you have a declining population, which is what I would aim for, then of course even a stable economic growth situation will give you increases in per capita income. So that's where I stand on that.
Do you have a sense of what the carrying capacity of Britain is, or of the world as a whole? Or?
Well, Britain, I put it at 10 or 15 million. I think that'd be absolutely fine. I mean, that would do us really splendidly. At a limit, 2025, I think it's complete nonsense that we are now confronted with an island, would you believe it, of 70 million people. I wrote a paper, I think it's the only paper the Conservative Party has ever published, and it was published as an old Queen Street paper in June 1972, oddly enough. And it was called Britain Needs a Population Policy. And
you could still argue that today, I mean, right now?
I certainly could.
Anyway, Stanley Johnson recently said that if for whatever reason you are not allowed on a plane, not allowed to travel, well, that's just a part of the national plan.
Actually means that countries need to divvy up this carbon budget between them, and then they need to divvy up the sectors, and then they need to have the measures which deal sector by sector with getting and if that means actually some of us are told, well, you can't go on a plane, that's fine. That's part of the national plan.
It's just a part of the plan, he says. Stay at home, soon to be a pod, and eat the bugs, you peasants. And of course, this will not affect any of them, as people are beginning to point out the hypocrisy. Yes, the world's elite have arrived at COP27 on hundreds of private jets to lecture you about climate change, and of course, it was sponsored by Coca-Cola. However, it's not just that they're hypocrites, it's that they think they are rulers and that you are a peasant, and rulers simply get access to things that peasants don't. None of them will starve, none of them will give up a single car or yacht, but you, peasant, you don't deserve any of those things. Now, okay, so before we get into the main aspects to COP27, let's find out what Biden has committed the United States to. And I quote, President Joe Biden announced increased investments in countries and projects related to climate change in an effort to adhere to global climate targets, while declaring steps to limit methane emissions within the country in remarks given at the 27th Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, otherwise known as COP27. Today, as a down payment, we're announcing a $150 million initiative that specifically supports adaptation efforts throughout Africa, Biden said in his speech in Egypt. And I quote again from Biden, alongside the European Union and Germany, a $500 million package to finance and facilitate Egypt's transition to clean energy will enable Egypt to deploy 10 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030, while of course bringing offline 5 gigawatts of inefficient gas-powered facilities. This will reduce emissions in Egypt's power sector by 10%, end of quote. Now besides that, Joe Biden announced another project underway between American firms and the government of Angola to invest $2 billion in building new solar projects in their country. Okay, so a former NSA officer claims exactly what I claim is, because it's easy to see, Anyway, and I quote, "The current administration's focus on climate change can be geopolitically hazardous as green policies can shift power into the hands of China, which has, of course, monopolized the supply chain of rare minerals required in the production of renewable energy technology." Yes, this is a big problem. However, this is probably why at the G20 summit, China says that the United States and China relations can get back on track. Yeah, that makes sense. It's all a part of a broader plan. As they say in that commercial, by 2030, the United States will not be the world's superpower. They know exactly what they're doing. Now, coincidentally, the Great Reset Agenda 2030 perfectly aligned with China's Plan 2049. Now, our commitment to these initiatives not only will lead to implementation of social engineering mechanisms, social credit, however, it will also lead to more censorship and the destruction of the middle class. It destroys the free market, which ultimately creates a serf class, entirely dependent upon government, but will also lead to a world being run by the BRICS system and dominated by China. Speaking of which, the BRICS system brought in 12 more nations, and it is expanding quickly. Yes, the dollar is in trouble. However, one of the things that worries me the most is the overarching global system being created. In order to get this new system implemented, they are utilizing lies and manipulation, the full power of the federal government, including with world governments and corporations. It is a perfect storm of authoritarian dictates and delusions of grandeur.
Let's also be clear. The future is not just happening. The future is built by us, by a powerful community as you here in this room. We have the means to improve the states of the world.
Now it is all about a CBDC, programmable money, social credit scores, carbon trackers, and surveillance tied to a digital ID. This is what everything is about. The quote-unquote environmentalism is a ruse. Every single action is about resetting the economy to carbon-based, monetizing nature. Yes, as I said, it is a perfect storm, and that storm is upon us now. All its elements clearly point to an orchestrated intention. In other words, it cannot be an accident, and the intention we discern in the current historical moment, the underlying plan, would appear to lay the groundwork for what has been called a techno-totalitarian digital dark age. This, of course, is associated with the Club of Rome, the UN, and the World Economic Forum. That is what has come to be known as the Great Reset. The corporate takeover of property, health, currency, travel, energy, and sustenance. And the upshot involves a thorough restructuring of democratic society along neo-medieval lines. An elimination of the middle class, a two-tier political order, and the reduction of a global census. A climate change policy entailing carbon taxes, bans on fertilizers, and the shutting down of standard energy production. The marketing of costly and inefficient electric vehicles that threaten to deplete the power grid, and legislating the largely unworkable green renewables based on insecure and fabricated science and dodgy computer models, whose effect has been to impoverish both producers and ordinary citizens, bringing about a new and despotic dispensation. This also includes supply chain disruptions, government-induced food and fuel shortages, rampant inflation, pricing the necessities of life beyond the ability of the vast numbers of people to afford them, Malthusian policies and social plans to create a growing cohort of human beings who do not reproduce, which of course is their plan for depopulation, or a euphemism, population management. However, it also includes the creation of a cashless digital economy and the introduction of digital ID with the aim of establishing a China-style social credit system. Yes, it would deprive the individual of personal freedom and discretionary choice. And that's not all. It also includes the initiation of proxy wars, as in Ukraine, further resulting in crippling forms of material scarcity, economic pain, and population stress. All of these factors are occurring at the same exact time. That is, they are components of a perfect storm brought to bear on the global community, or more accurately, on the community of Western nations. Now, to me, one cannot credibly deny that there exists a conscious purpose behind so evident a cacophony of simultaneous events, envisioning a new and reductionist world order and population diminishment in every sense of the term. The liberal civilization of the West is to be replaced by an anti-capitalist global coup, favoring a totalitarian governing class. Indeed, to change the metaphor, what is impending is kind of a mass extinction event on the level of culture, state, and civilization, a kind of ideological asteroid, or quote-unquote planet killer, orbiting very close to the future. As stated, one of the ways they will do this is via the climate change pitch. In the last video, we detailed this in relation to their population control mechanisms. Anyway, COP27 took place within the Global Climate Change Initiative, and in it, they detailed a very disturbing future. And well, let's see what's going on with Agenda 2030. And I quote, "Humanity must cooperate or perish in the face of accelerating climate change impacts," UN Chief Antonio Guterres told world leaders on Monday at talks in Egypt. Well, in the midst of a barrage of international crises that have battered economies and shaken international relations, Guterres said humanity faces a stark choice. Cooperate or perish, he said. It is either a climate solidarity pact or a collective suicide pact.
The two largest economies, the United States and China, have a particular responsibility to join efforts to make this pact a reality. And this is our only hope of meeting our climate goals. Humanity has a choice: cooperate or perish. It is either a climate solidarity pact or a collective suicide pact.
Translation: world government or we kill you. Anyway, the world's financial elite are looking to tokenize just about everything in nature. Speaking at a side session at COP27 on Wednesday, former Bank of England senior advisor and G20 co-chairman Michael Sharon said that carbon was, and I quote, "moving very quickly into a system where it's going to be close to a currency," and that next on the agenda was the tokenization of nature and biodiversity, where places like Indonesia, Brazil, and Africa would be absolutely critical, end of quote.
So central banks are also starting to understand nature has real value. Carbon we already figured out. And carbon is moving very quickly into a system where it's going to be very close to a currency. Basically being able to take a ton of absorbed or sequestered carbon and being able to create a forward pricing curve with financial service architecture, documentation. I just came out of a meeting this morning how we're trying to accelerate that. To be quite honest, not to get very boring, but we're on financial topics and things, but they're going to be derivatives. And you need ISDA documentation if you want to trade a derivative in the marketplace. And all of this actually matters for nature as well. I'm going to quickly hand off, but again, I want to talk about value one more time, because the southern part of the world has value far greater than large elements of the northern part. And when we start thinking about and putting prices on water, on trees, on biodiversity, we find, where does that sit? I'm doing a lot of work out of Asia, and I say that my next door neighbor, Indonesia, is the left lung of the world, and obviously Brazil's the right, and Africa, absolutely critical. And we need their natural capital as a system-based world more than we need that 66 billion we've got sitting in the basement of the Bank of England. So how do we, and I'm hoping this discussion today, at least from a central banker's point of view, on how do we start tokenizing, how do we start building systems that actually create not only the value, but transfer that value around the world.
And I quote again, carbon we have already figured out, and carbon is moving very quickly into a system where it's going to be very close to a currency. Basically, being able to take a ton of absorbed and sequestered carbon and being able to create a forward pricing curve with financial service, architecture, and documentation. Now, he also noted that carbon as a currency, well, there's going to be derivatives. Next on the agenda is the tokenization of water, trees, and just about everything else in nature. So, as stated, the ex-central banker added that Indonesia, Brazil, and Africa were absolutely critical because, and I quote again, "we need their natural capital as a system-based world, more than we need that $66 billion of gold coins we have sitting in the basement of the Bank of England." Now, his remarks came during a panel on digital environment assets, programmable money, and the future of climate finance. Yes, the whole point was to explore how tokenizing environmental assets through blockchain tech can address frictions in mobilizing and distributing climate finance globally. However, our latter-day Malthusians, the resetters, and the plutocratic Marxists persist in advancing their campaign, like avid but errant disciples of Francis Galton, who claimed, and I quote, "What nature does blindly, slowly, ruthlessly, man may do providently, quickly, and kindly." Well, the quote-unquote kindly part soon dropped out of the formula. Yes, it has been replaced with the ruthless vigor of destruction. Fortunately for us, resistance is mounting. Yes, so-called populist revolts in countries like France, Spain, Italy, and Sweden. And don't get me wrong, there's many, many more. However, my point is that all over the world, people are rejecting this agenda, rejecting this technocratic future. Yes, all the things we have talked about is not a conspiracy theory, but a conspiracy fact. It is a conspiracy that seeks to destabilize the world order, uproot the foundations of long-standing usages and traditions, to collapse the economic basis of the West, and in short, build back worse. Yes, the so-called climate initiatives are a Trojan horse for a technocratic system. It's a ruse, a manipulation to get people to accept the fact that the powers that be will be controlling every aspect of your life. We have talked about it quite a bit, but the main solution being proposed consists of surveillance measures and carbon markets. It's all a scam to rip you off and shovel the wealth of the masses into the collective hands of the elite. As stated previously, during COVID, we saw the largest wealth transfer from the middle and lower class to the top 1%. This is going to be that, but on steroids. And it is to the point where they are actively and openly talking about monetizing nature. Once you hear what they have to say, how could anyone accept this? I have no idea, but it is disturbing to say the least. Okay, so now let's get into the G20 and B20 Summits. And just so you know, the B20 is apparently just the corporate offshoot of G20. Anyway, we have a few clips to go over, and let's start with Trudeau. Speaking at the B20 Summit, Justin Trudeau confirms only government-approved free speech will be allowed online, and it will be monitored by AI.
For example, Canada is leading on the responsible development and use of artificial intelligence. We're also undertaking major legislative reforms that will strengthen privacy protections for Canadians, including specific provisions to protect children. See, while always ensuring and defending free speech, we must make it clear that it cannot be okay to bully and attack people online. Governments, and especially big technology companies, need to safeguard people's data and privacy and address online harassment and violence to ensure trust in technology.
And this is exactly what they've been working on since 2020, and we have talked about it a few times. So a few years ago, the World Economic Forum announced on June 29th that it was going to initiate a new public-private partnership with big tech and governments around the world to identify and uproot all opinions from the internet that it considers quote-unquote harmful. And yes, this is called the Global Coalition for Digital Safety. This is exactly what was pitched, and as far as I can tell, the European Union and Canada are all in on this. As for the United States, they want to be. And we have to make sure the authoritarians in power right now cannot tie us into this as well. Of course they want to. For example, the Disinformation Board, the Department of Homeland Security working with social media companies, and the continued push for censorship. You know, they're just manipulating people with terms such as hate speech, misinformation, disinformation, and you gotta watch out for threats from foreign information warfare. Now the last part is true, but they're exploiting it. However, it is through those that they hope fear and a manufactured consensus will push public opinion towards allowing the government to dictate what you can and cannot say. And of course, their censorship will simply revolve around rooting out dissent. Ideological hegemony. And that is all they are concerned about. If you think world leaders sit around contemplating how misinformation is harming you, personally, yes, the government just wants to protect you from harmful words. Well, then you are brain dead. The government is just concerned with a mass revelation in the population. They cannot have people realize what they are doing. Otherwise, there will be a revolt. It's all about preserving power. And unfortunately, dummies just seem to fall in line. Anyway, up next, if you thought we were out of the woods regarding the quote-unquote medical predicament, well, you are sorely mistaken. They cannot let this go. Yes, the G20 panel calls for a global digital health passport. The Indonesian health minister went on to say that Indonesia has achieved, along with G20 countries, an agreement, and I quote, to have this digital certificate using World Health Organization standards.
So let's have a digital health certificate acknowledged by WHO if you have been vaccinated or tested properly, then you can move around. So for the next pandemic, instead of stopping the movement of the people 100%, which clock the economy globally, you can still provide some movement of the people. Indonesia has achieved, G20 country has agreed to have this digital certificate using WHO standard, and we will submit into the next World Health Assembly in Geneva as the revision to international health regulation. So hopefully for the next pandemic, we can still see some movement of the people, some movement of the goods, and movement of the economy.
If you've done what we want and are a good little NPC, then you can move around, a little bit. Otherwise, you must be a prisoner within your own home. Again, that is despite the data and all we know about this particular illness. This all has nothing to do with your health. And really, it's just more confirmation that this medical predicament scenario isn't going away. They need it to finish their reset. They need to continue to normalize lockdowns. They need people to accept their subjugation. And a great way to manipulate people into allowing this tyranny is through fear. However, to be effective, it has to be fear of something unknown, an abstract threat, and one that an individual cannot personally prepare for. The threat of disease is a perfect manipulation. A global digital certificate dictated by the World Health Organization standards, because as we know, the WHO has been spot on about all of this since the very beginning. Oh wait, no, they weren't. In fact, even after they had data refuting their claims, they still push it. However, as we've talked about, fear shuts down the prefrontal cortex, which affects decision making. So, there is a reason for the fear porn. It is solely to break you down and get you in line with the global powers that be. Leaders at G20 have signed a declaration which states that vaccine passports will be adopted to facilitate all international travel. And that means that any vaccination the WHO determines that you should have, well, you gotta go get it. Essentially, they are changing your rights and freedoms forever, and there is silence from the media. Now, some of the disturbing details include plans to use this quote-unquote digital certificate as a right-to-work condition, which means that without it, you cannot work. And China is doing this for a quote-unquote right to eat, which means that you must scan your QR code before being allowed into restaurants. And let me ask you a question. Who wants to live like this? Because I don't. Now in this clip you can see they're scanning their QR codes before being allowed inside the building. And after you scan your QR code, if it comes up yellow, well then get ready because you're going to a quarantine camp. And as you can see in this clip, you have to scan your QR code before being allowed on the work site. This is happening. Now I don't usually come across Laura Ingraham content, but is she always on point like this?
And while most of you were sleeping, the group of globalists at the G20 have been busy figuring out how to further control your life. Now, at the parallel B20 event hosting business leaders, here's what one health official suggested.
Let's have a digital health certificate acknowledged by WHO if you have been vaccinated or tested properly, then you can move around. So for the next pandemic, instead of stopping the movement of the people 100%, which clogged the economy globally, you can still provide some movement of the people.
Well, what a complete creep. Now, it's almost as if we've been predicting this, since the spring of 2020? Of course we have been. Now, the real goal isn't safety. We know more about the virus. You can still spread it if you're vaccinated. A lot of people have antibody-dependent enhancement. The goal here is monitoring and controlling movement. So unless you meet the WHO standards, no movement for you. Of course, the WHO is obedient to China, the CCP, meaning the Chinese will have us do this to ourselves, apparently, before they even have to try.
I mean, in this instance, she gets it. This is about controlling the global population, controlling movement. That's all this is. They are just using the health manipulation to gain said control. And once we give that up, we will never get it back. This will be the quote-unquote new normal. So my advice would be to reject this or forever hold your peace. So we have one more great insight regarding this, and I quote, "They won't care if half the population refuses to comply with their vaccine passports, because that fulfills the aim of less international travel for the masses. Can you not see it yet?" I mean, they're spot on. It's sinister. It's diabolical. Either way, if you're stuck with the digital ID, they control you. If you refuse, well, shit, they still kind of control you because you won't be able to do anything. It is diabolical. So the guy speaking in that clip was the Indonesian health minister. So Indonesia has recently embarked on a mission to, and I quote, improve global health architecture, with Indonesian President Joko Widodo saying that funding would go towards mechanisms to prevent and cope with future pandemics. And I quote, "I express my gratitude for countries' contributions to the pandemic fund. And by saying, in the name of God, I am launching the pandemic fund today." So far, $1.4 billion has been raised from 15 countries and 3 philanthropic institutions. Australia, France, and Saudi Arabia have all expressed their commitments to the fund as well. However, the funds raised are not enough for the Indonesian president, citing a WHO study that said they would need an additional $31 billion annually to prevent pandemics. This is not going away. The Health Pass is the digital ID, and as we know, this digital ID attaches to the financial system and the newly developed carbon markets, the CBDC, and of course, the social credit score. But it also acts as the surveillance vector. We have to avoid this aspect. If we can avoid this digital ID, we could avoid the tyranny. The only way they can control the population is by getting everyone linked to this ID, the digital certificate, and tying it to their technocratic system. It's a critical pillar to their whole system. If we avoid that, we might avoid the chaos. Okay, so let's get into Klaus Schwab's opening remarks at the B20 Summit.
Excellencies, distinguished participants of this very important meeting. First, of course, if we look at all the challenges, we can speak about a multi-crisis, an economic, a political, a social, an ecological, an institutional crisis. But actually, what we have to confront is a deep, systemic, and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process. Politically, the driving forces for this political transformation is the transition into a multipolar world, which has a tendency to make our world much more fragmented.
Ah yes, a deep and systemic restructuring of our world, and the world will look very different after we've gone through this quote-unquote transition, aka the Great Reset, which of course is just a conspiracy theory, right? Anyway, they always pitch this as some great end result. Once we get through this transition, our world will look very, very different. Yeah. There will be billions less people due to starvation, the energy crisis, and perpetual war. And in the end, we will all be closely monitored and controlled as if we were merely meat machines, biological machines with no independent thought. And if they truly get their way, we will be all linked to this Internet of Bodies, Internet of Everything smart grid.
The very idea of human being some sort of natural concept is really going to change.
Our bodies will be so high-tech, we won't be able to really distinguish between what's natural and what's artificial.
Inside our own heads is the most complex arrangement of matter in the known universe.
You might ask yourself, can we get to be superhumans?
Directly connected to the hive mind. Now that is way, way, way in the future. And when people hear something like that, they shut down. Oh, well, that's just crazy. I mean, hey, Klaus Schwab and Yuval Harari openly talk about this aspect. You just have to think one step further. For example, in this clip, Klaus Schwab says, we can read your brainwaves, direct monitoring of your biometrics and thought process.
Can you imagine that in 10 years when we are sitting here, we have an implant in our brains, and I can immediately feel, because you all will have implants, and we measure your brainwaves, and I can immediately tell you how the people react, or I can feel how the people react to your answers.
Or, of course, we have Yuval Harari.
COVID is critical because this is what convinces people to accept, to legitimize total biometric surveillance. we want to stop this epidemic, we need not just to monitor people, we need to monitor what's happening under their skin. What we have seen so far is corporations and governments collecting data about where we go, who we meet, what movies we watch. The next phase is the surveillance going under our skin. We now see mass surveillance systems established even in democratic countries, which previously rejected them. And we also see a change in the nature of surveillance. Previously, surveillance was mainly above the skin. Now it's going under the skin.
Embedded in his hand is a microchip that serves as his keys, his ID, and his wallet.
Governments want to know not just where we go or who we meet. Above all, they want to know what is happening under our skin. What's our body temperature? What's our blood pressure? What is our medical condition?
In a matter of seconds, the chip is inserted. The transformation is complete.
When scanned, all of a person's information about their vaccination status is shown on a reader or phone.
Now humans are developing even bigger powers than ever before. We are really acquiring divine powers of creation and destruction. We are really upgrading humans into gods. We are acquiring, for instance, the power to re-engineer life. Humans are now hackable animals.
You will own nothing, and you will be happy.
You know, the whole idea that humans have, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's all.
Now, how do we deal with this transition, which will last several years?
Now, this all means, at least at the beginning, a cost burden. Now, if you restructure a company, you write off the costs, and of course, the shareholders are suffering. If you restructure an economy, the result is a reduction of income, of disposable income, which can lead to extensive social tensions, which we see in our world developing now. How do we deal with this transition, which may last for several years? Not just applying crisis management, not just reacting, but constructing the future with a purpose. We should use this transition time with a clear concept of what we want to achieve, how we want to come out of this transition time. We want to come out as a more sustainable, more resilient, and more inclusive world.
I mean, of course, restructure the entire economy instead. Okay, yeah. So perhaps we do need something like this. The petrodollar is not ideal, of course. But switching to this mirror-like system where instead of oil, it's carbon-based is the same economic subjugation, just tied to a different environmental factor. Now, the extensive social tensions that Klaus Schwab is alluding to is the effect of the collapse of the global economy. People will riot, and it's going to get ugly. Now, there are multiple reasons as to why Klaus Schwab repeatedly warns that we need to prepare for an angry world. The reason being, their big plan will result in such disarray, chaos, and death that they know and are preparing for a revolution.
Young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, half of this government, are actually young noble leaders of the world economic forum. We penetrate the cabinets. The change is not just happening. The change can be shaped by us. We have to prepare for a more angry world. How to prepare? Take the necessary action to create a fairer world. I see the need for a great reset. So people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had,
and everything will be normal again. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen.
Which again is why they want censorship abilities. They cannot and will not have people congregate and plan dissent. They must control the population while they destroy the world, so that they can build back better.
What makes the fourth industrial revolution different? Three things. Contrary to earlier technological innovation, it doesn't deal with one or two innovations. It's a whole panoply of technologies which interact and which completely will change how we produce, how we consume, how we communicate. But the second element is the speed. And if you look at technological revolutions, it usually goes in the form of an S-curve. And just now, we are at the inflection point to exponential development. And technology will change completely what we are doing at this present time. And not only what we are doing, and that's another change, it will change and it will have an impact on even who we are.
Yes, it will change who we are. We will no longer be human. The human condition will be replaced by heavily controlled NPC mentalities, as if we're not already there. I'm half joking, but however, the fourth industrial revolution will indeed change us. It breaks off from the human species into something new. Again, I know that sounds crazy, but they openly talk about this as well. Now these transhumanists have referred to this new species by a few different names. Instead of Homo sapiens, they call it Homo Deus, the Davos man.
Now in this long process, the complexity of society increased along many different dimensions. I mean, for example, social organization moved from the level of the tribe to the city-state to the nation to the planet. And the economic basis from hunting and gathering to settled agriculture, industrial capitalism, and the globalizing economy of our own time. Communication from the evolution of language, to writing, printing, and the modern information revolution. But the defining feature of the planetary transition is increasing global connectivity. And there were many early expressions of this. For example, the formation of the United Nations, or on a more symbolic level, the Apollo mission that first transmitted back that iconic vision of our fragile blue planet afloat in the cosmos. It became everybody's logo. But the real takeoff, I think, was over the last couple of decades. And the signals included environmental change at the scale of the biosphere, the revolution in information and communications technology that is shrinking our world, the collapse of the Soviet Union and the increasing hegemony of global capitalism, the emergence of new actors such as the World Trade Organization, a multinational corporation, and the appearance of a new global species, which I call Davos man. At the same time, there was the Earth Summit and the emergence of globally linked civil society as a force in world affairs.
Or a more nuanced view, as Yuval Harari claims, we are moving into an era where they will be gods.
By hacking organisms, elites may gain the power to re-engineer the future of life itself. Because once you can hack something, you can usually also engineer it.
Natural selection is replaced by intelligent design. The era of inorganic life is now beginning.
In the coming decades, AI and biotechnology will give us godlike abilities to re-engineer life and even to create completely new life forms. We are about to enter a new era of inorganic life shaped by intelligent design. Our intelligent design. The question is what kind of gods we will be. Will we be merciful and wise gods, or will we be petty, vengeful, and irresponsible gods?
The third difference, which we see in the fourth industrial revolution, is the fact that the winners take it all. Contrary to the previous industrial revolutions, it's very difficult to copy. So if you are a first mover, you are the winners.
If you are a World Economic Forum first mover, you are the winners. Yep. If you comply and are with us on the Great Reset, then you will be a winner. The rest of us, naturally, will be considered the losers. As of course, we will lose free will. We will be eating bugs and have no private property. And we will be entirely dependent upon the state. Yeah, if they got their way, we will indeed all be losers in this scenario. But Klaus and his buddies will be the winners, so that's always good. Such benevolent leaders, huh? Psychopaths is more fitting.
Government and business have to cooperate in order to become a fast fish, because in our world of today, it's not anymore so much the big fish who eats the small fish, but it is the fast fish who eats the slow fish. And in order to be a fast fish and a big fish, hopefully, like Indonesia, you have to have two co-pilots, business and governments.
And of course, global fascism is the only way. It's interesting that Klaus Schwab's father was a Nazi engineer, and now he is perpetuating public-private partnerships, which of course is just the merging of government and corporation. That's fascism, not the social media kind where everyone is a fascist. This is real fascism. So let me try to understand this a little bit better. The son of a Nazi is perpetuating a global system of fascism. Yes, okay, so the Fourth Reich is here, and so many do not realize what they are supporting. Resist the reset, for the love of God. I know, when we talk about this stuff, sometimes it sounds a little crazy, but this is happening. Now, one thing that continues to surprise me is the audacity of these people. And while we're at it, let's toss in the audacity of the establishment media. The audacity for them to claim that we're just conspiracy theorists for rejecting this. They openly talk about it. And if we go along with this, the human condition, the human experience, will be toppled for this technocratic and transhuman future. Yes, my friends, we are at a critical point in history. And what choices we make now will determine if we will watch the fall of humanity and the rise of the quote-unquote new gods, Homo Deus, or the Davos man. Anyway, once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. Of course, make sure you disobey those true fascistas and yes, the technocrats. However, as always, I do hope you have a good night.